I think that there are a lot of problems with how Star Trek treats its women. Their conceptualization is that, like, we're so far in the future, everybody is like exploring strange new worlds, blah blah blah. But it's interesting to me that their conceptualization of this future doesn't include more significant equality. And like, Star Trek is being created, the original Star Trek, right at the sort of like beginning groundswell of the civil rights movement in the United States. So it's not like there was no it's not like it's a decade prior in the 50s where there wouldn't have been the kind of awareness about like a push for equal rights amongst women or for Black people. Instead, it's just like, oh, we've got Spock and people are kind of racist towards him. And we use that racism as like plot points repeatedly because Kirk's whole the like way that Spock is always able to tell if Kirk isn't actually Kirk is because Kirk will like say something racist towards Spock. And then Spock is like, oh, that's not Kirk because Kirk is a good guy. But then that doesn't extend to the way that Kirk treats women at all. Kirk isn't like, oh, yes, like my female staffers are just as capable as my male staffers. Like, it's never female red shirts who are like sent down and who are disposable. It's always male ones. And that's interesting too, because that's like a form of sort of like protective chauvinism, right? Like theoretically there are female red shirts, but they're never the ones who get sent down as like security personnel or anything like that. They're always the ones who are like the yeomen serving the food. So nice. Really great. What exceptional gender roles. And it is very rigid. And it's interesting because like we know that it was a woman's intervention that like helps get Star Trek on TV in the first place, with Lucille Ball like really pushing because she really loved Star Trek. And we know that like Roddenberry's wife was very involved and she has multiple roles through the show. And that actually initially they did try to be a bit more egalitarian. Like they had the female staffers in pants and it didn't test well. And then they changed it to short skirts. And Nichelle Nichols does an interview about how the female actresses at the time loved it because the mini skirts were really trendy. So the like outfits are actually really in keeping with the style from the late 60s. So we also have to remember that too, right? Like when we look at it, we go, ooh, big sexism. But Nichelle Nichols is like, well, we actually felt like super trendy and like it was really reflective of like what we wanted to be wearing in our like day-to-day lives outside of the show. And then they do really cool stuff, like one of the first interracial kisses on television, not the first, like they like to claim. The first one actually was in Britain. But there are a lot of problems. Like the female characters are often infantilized, even when they're theoretically doctors or, you know, high-ranking officials in the Federation. But then they sort of get like, oh, that's nice, sweetheart. Kirk is going to be like dashing and rescue you, and you're going to fall onto his chest and gaze up at him with both of your hands planted artfully on his pecs so that they can emphasize that Kirk is jacked. But yeah, it's just kind of a bummer to me that like when they're conceiving of this like whole sort of like futuristic world where things are, they're theoretically like they've done away with war and they've done away with this and they've done away with that. They haven't done away with the ingrained sexism that people are already agitating against in the United States where the show is where and when the show is being created. I don't know. I feel like that says a lot. And I know that I've mentioned frontier theory before, where anytime you have a new frontier, theoretically social rights, like social equality increases. So one would think that by the time we're establishing an entire space federation, equality should be like there. We should be there. And they're just not. They are not at all there. The women are entirely disposable. They only ever advance Kirk's plot lines. I wouldn't say growth because I don't think Kirk grows as a character at any point. But like Nichelle Nichols, like Uhura doesn't really ever get her own big storylines in the way that like Spock does and the way Bones has. And even like Scotty gets a bit more of a like storyline every once in a while than Uhura does, and she's supposed to be sort of like the lead female, like the one sort of like reoccurring consistent female character. And it was a big deal because she was a Black woman, and that's amazing, but they really don't do her justice, I think, at any point in terms of like giving her sort of a lead role in a story at any point. And the only time she really does is, again, to like serve Kirk's character. 2 thumbs down for women's representation on...
Sorry, go on.
2 thumbs up for that summary.
So just picking up on what Nicole was saying, you won't have got to this yet because it's the very last episode of the series, but when you're talking about ingrained gender roles, there was a quote at the very end of the original series where Kirk says that women can't serve as starship captains because...
Kirk himself, of course, is never emotional. Never taken in by any sort of emotional manipulation, anybody's sort of charms or wiles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kirk is practically a Vulcan. He's so logical and unemotional, you know? Like, Kirk, Spock, can't even tell the difference between them.
I mean, my personal favorite part about all of that is that Spock theoretically has a very hard time advancing through Federation in the Starfleet in the first place.
Because he's Vulcan.
Because he's a Vulcan. And if your problem is emotionality, one would think that would be like the ideal. Like, only have Vulcans as captains, and then humanity can serve as the underlings. But maybe that's just my hysterical uterus shifting up into my brain speaking. I don't know. It's so hard to tell these days.
So intimidated that he dropped his phone.
I'm just going to go hang upside down for a bit to try to get it back in the right spot. I'll be right back.
No, he's gone again. Say that all again. This is going straight into the outtakes.